That we had on the hotline. Matthew Coller joining us, Vikings reporter and host at 1500 ESPN Radio in Minneapolis. Matthew, you hopefully can help us with one thing. We know that Kevin Stefanski will be interviewed today by the Browns. We know he was interviewed a year ago by the Browns, but we don't know much about him other than the fact that he's been in Minnesota a very long time. Can you tell us a little bit about Stefanski, the man, what he represents, and what would make him a good head coach?
Yeah, I think the fact that he's been in Minnesota a long time is a great place to start with Kevin Stefanski, because it says a lot about his personality and his ability to work with a lot of different types of players and a lot of different types of coaches. I mean, he starts out as a quality control guy, which, is a good job, but is nothing like being an offensive coordinator, and had to, work himself up and up and up the ladder. He coached tight ends. He coached running backs. He was the quarterback coach for Kirk Cousins last year, and then he gets elevated to offensive coordinator to work with Gary Kubiak this year, and we've seen huge gains in the offense from where it was last year with John DeFilippo as the offensive coordinator. A very big change in philosophy to roll out the bootlegs and throwing down the field with Kirk Cousins to maximize his strengths, and I think that's the best way that I would describe Kevin Stefanski's philosophy, is looking at the player, not the scheme, and saying, well, we can know enough about football to work the X's and O's around what guys do well, and there's no better example than Kirk Cousins' success this year.
And I think that speaks obviously to the success he's had as an offensive coordinator, and we've seen offensive coordinators come here and try to be head coaches and unfortunately not have that success. What do you think would make Kevin Stefanski a good head coach, and how is he in the room in terms of being able to be a leader? The Browns are a team that have a ton of big personalities, a ton of very accomplished players as well, and I think that's the number one thing Jimmy Haslam said he was looking for: leadership, the ability to command the room and make the whole be greater than the sum of the parts. How does Kevin Stefanski rate? What's his personality like from that standpoint?
Yeah, so it's always difficult to tell how someone is going to handle a situation like that with a lot of big personalities in the locker room, but I would say that you do have that here too. I mean, Kirk Cousins was the guy that, in his previous team, the president of the team used to call him Kurt instead of Kirk on purpose because he didn't get along with him. And, Stephon Diggs this year skipped a couple of days of practices and then came back, and what did they do? They threw it to Stephon Diggs a bunch of times, and it worked out great. I think that the best way that Kevin Stefanski can lead is by being, very, very smart about his approach, but also understanding how different personalities and different people work. I mean, he's just worked with so many different types of head coaches, so many different types of players, and when you have a philosophy of trying to make it work for everyone with what they do best, I think that that's the closest you can get to making everyone happy. You guys know it's football. There's always going to be things going on. There's always going to be drama. There's going to be injuries. There's going to be off-the-field stuff. And when you take over as a head coach, that all lands on your shoulders. And that's the one area where I would say I couldn't predict how anybody would handle that, because that's just a totally new type of situation for being any coordinator or anything else like that. But the reviews that I get from everybody on and off the record about Kevin Stefanski is that he is one of the easiest guys to work with, and I think it's been most impressive how he's worked with Gary Kubiak. It would have been really easy to have Gary Kubiak come in and have Kevin Stefanski get annoyed with that, get frustrated. Hey, it's my offense. You guys made me the offensive coordinator, and now you're bringing in this legend to look over me. But instead, those guys have worked together perfectly, and as you saw, against New Orleans, that this is an offense that can hit big plays down the field at times, that runs very effectively, and seems to have melded those two philosophies. And I think that's a lot of what you have to do as a head coach, is you have to look at whoever your defensive coordinator is, whoever your quarterback coach, your running back coach, your players, and figure out what works for everybody. And I think Stefanski is one of the best guys that I've seen in this business at doing that.
Matthew, the other thing you wonder is, and we wondered about it, is, he's been in this position a long time. He's been a Minnesota Viking employee for a long time. Would they want to keep him one? There were rumors, that Mike maybe would be on a bit of a hot seat. I would think that that's done with the win at New Orleans. But I am curious, everything it seems like the Wilfs absolutely love him. Would they ever stand in the way and say, you know what, we're gonna jump this process and give you the head job?
No, you're 100% correct that the Wilfs have loved the job that Kevin Stefanski has done this year and last year when he was working with Kirk Cousins, and their relationship also speaks to how well you can work with a quarterback, which I think goes up there in terms of top things you need for a head coach. It's head coach and quarterback and then everybody else. But I think after the Saints win, all of that talk of Mike Zimmer potentially getting fired and so forth will go away. I also really questioned it to begin with. I mean, I heard some of the same things, that if the Vikings got blown out, that there could be big changes and so forth. But Mike Zimmer has completely turned around the culture of this organization and developed them into a team that is every year we're talking about, well, they have to set the bar at making the playoffs and potentially going deep. That's something that's really, really difficult to change. So now would they keep him is an interesting question, because Mike Zimmer did not let Kevin Stefanski go become an offensive coordinator somewhere else when he was a quarterback coach. But I think that Zimmer understands as well as anybody that when you get your shot, you have to go. So, I mean, Zimmer took years and years and years as a great defensive mind to finally get that shot here in Minnesota. I don't think he would deny anybody else an offensive coordinator gig, and he let Pat Shurmur go to New York after Shurmur had a marvelous year in 2017 here. So I would expect that if Kevin Stefanski gets offered the job, he'll be your head coach.
I have one question about Kevin Stefanski. It's something that, we haven't talked about. He spent his entire career with the Vikings organization. So what kind of a staff do you think he would be able to put up? A lot of times it's guys who have been in a variety of places and have connections here, there, and whatever. But and maybe I'm wrong, Stefanski might be very well connected around the league, which would be very good to know. But how would that, maybe play into his ability as a first-time head coach to be able to put together a good staff from around the league?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because you're always amazed at the number of connections that there are with NFL people and how many people know each other from working in one place or another. There was, now I'm forgetting who it was a communications intern with the Vikings and then ended up becoming an offensive coordinator and came back here years ago. I forget the name of the guy, but I mean, stuff like that happens all the time. So I don't think he would have a tough time getting people to be on his staff. I wouldn't be surprised, and maybe it would frustrate Browns fans if Pat Shurmur was a part of it, if Pat Shurmur ended up being his offensive coordinator. Those guys became extremely, extremely close when he was here with the Vikings, and obviously Pat Shurmur now out of a job. But Shurmur, when he was with the Vikings, did an incredible job of getting the most out of Case Keenum, and those two match up really closely philosophy-wise in terms of running the ball, running play actions, and taking shots down the field off of that. As far as the defensive side, that one's a lot tougher to know who he might have targeted. Wade Phillips doesn't have a job. It's a good idea, right? If you're Sean McVay, you bring in an old-school defensive coordinator to help you out who's been a head coach before. So I think you would probably look at some of the older-school defensive coaches who have a proven track record. I think that's probably the smartest way he would go.
Final one on Kevin, and we'll talk about the game coming up between the Vikings, obviously, and the 49ers. A lot of talk about how he's a guy who understands analytics and would really fit in with Paul DePodesta here with the Browns. From your experience with him, have you heard anything about that, or what that kind of, those kind of, I would say, vague talks that, oh, yes, he understands and likes analytics. Have you seen or heard him talk about how he utilizes those and his role as the offensive coordinator, or how he kind of views those, straight from the horse's mouth?
Sure, yeah. It's always a weird conversation, like, to even have, does someone use numbers to help them be better at their job? It's like a thing we still talk about. But Kevin Stefanski, I would put in the upper echelon of guys who understand all of the studies that have been done, all the pro football focused data, but also how to use that data. You'll talk to some analytics people who will tell you that running the football is just a bad idea. Like, okay, I can't really get on board with that, and I don't think Kevin Stefanski would either, because you have to run play action off of runs and things like that. But understanding that play action, for example, makes almost every quarterback in the league better. I believe Baker Mayfield last year with play action had a quarterback rating over 100, and without it was under 70. So Kevin Stefanski would come in immediately and say, all right, well, that's where we got to start. We have to start with setting up everything off play action, because that's what the numbers point to. And I would be really interested to see him handling game management. And I wonder often, because he is such a well-read guy with the numbers, how often he disagrees with punts at the other 40 and things like that. But I don't think he's going to go so far outside of the lines. Like, sometimes when you read analytics articles, you're like, okay, I don't think this really you can really apply it truly to the NFL, because it's too far outside the lines, even if it's an interesting statement or something like that. I think his experience in the coaching rooms of all different sorts with the Vikings would kind of meld with those numbers. I don't think it's going to be like, no, he's going to go with the numbers all the time, because the numbers would probably tell you that running Delvin Cook last week wasn't the best idea, but I could tell you for being in New Orleans, it was a great idea for most of that game.
We'll get you out of here on that one, which is probably what you're spending most of your time talking about rather than your offensive coordinator. This feels like a tough one for us, for you guys, going from playing in St. against the Saints in New Orleans and then playing on a short week at San Francisco. The Thielen stuff, I would think, would be a little bit concerning. What's your feeling going into Saturday?
Well, it's definitely concerning with Thielen, because I'm just driving to our studios from the practice facility right now, and Adam Thielen limped by me as we were in the locker room, and I thought, man, is he going to be pretty hindered? I mean, I'm not a doctor, but it didn't look great from how you'd want to see a guy walking off the practice field and not even participating in anything today outside of just standing and walking around out there. That's not a very good sign for them. Thielen was absolutely huge last week, coming up with not only the big catch, but a couple of third down receptions as well. And then Stephon Diggs sick, a bunch of other guys who practiced but were also on the injury report. That's the toughest part for me that I can't get over. If we were doing this on paper, we would say this is about as close of a matchup as you could ever have between these two teams from quarterback on down. But when you go into the circumstance, you got to fly out there after playing an incredibly emotional and physical game against New Orleans, go into their house. They've had 2 weeks to prepare for you, and you can bet that they were, preparing for both outcomes. That's where it becomes really tough for me to pick the Vikings.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for him, to say the least. This has been great. Thank you, Matthew. Go ahead. You have one more?
I just have one final one. You've gotten to know, I'm sure, in your time there, one of our great friends, Britton Cole quitters. We call him Britton Cole.
Because there's no quit in him.
There's no quit in him. That's right.
Cole, yeah.
Just a tremendous human being,
wow.
and I'm jealous that you get to probably interact with him more than we do in person. But so anyway, give him our regards. What are your thoughts on the great Cole?
I have not heard that one before, the no quit line.
Yeah,
I guess I will maybe not use that to him in the locker room.
No,
he would love it. If you called him Britton Cole, he would love it. He'd be like, "Wait, what?" He would love it.
If you go up to him and say Britton Cole, 100%. I promise you he will love it.
But emphasize the Cole.
Yeah, you really sell
right.
it. Yeah.
I will hold you guys responsible if that
Please
goes
do.
badly.
Please do. Fine.
You know what, though? He had me sold when, for Christmas, he bought the long snapper a giant stuffed sloth. That was like a life-size stuffed sloth that he gave to the long snapper as some sort of inside joke. But, I mean, punchers are great. And actually, he has been a massive difference maker. I'm not even kidding. His relationship with the kicker, Dan Bailey, has been huge. Last year, Bailey struggled, and the holding was so much better this year that, yeah, good thing he didn't quit, I guess.
Yeah, there's no quit in Cole.
That's
there's
what he
no
does.
quit. No, he'll love it. I promise you.
Looks tremendous in a shearling as well.
The reaction. Oh, the shearling, of course. Incredible repertoire with the shearling. Matthew, good talking to you, buddy.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, that's very good. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Sometimes I think, like, as we're convincing a human we've never met to go up to a professional
he
player.
Probably thinks we're setting him up for the old okey doke. We're
not. No,
this
legitimate.
You're in now.
You're in. You do this, you're in.
You're in.
I just sent him a text. I said, it's legit.
Yes, yeah.
We know him.
Tell him to look at his Twitter.
Yeah.
Look at his Twitter. Look at Nikki's Twitter.
Yeah, you'd see it. It would all be there.
It's all there.
Final segment up next. CBD 850 ESPN Cleveland.